September 12, 1897. On a jagged ridge in the northwest frontier, 21 men are waking up to what will become a death sentence. They are surrounded by a tribal force numbering in the thousands. They are cut off from any support. They have limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, and no way out. But they are not there to win. They are not even there to survive. This small stone outpost is the only thing connecting two major British forts. If this post falls, the forts go blind. If the forts go blind, the entire defensive line of the frontier collapses. So the order is simple. Do not retreat. Do not surrender. Hold the line until the signal goes dark. This is the story of the Battle of Saragarhi, and to understand why 21 men chose to stay when they could have walked away, you have to understand the trap they were standing in. The geography of the Samana Ridge was a nightmare. The British had built two massive fortresses to control the region, Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan. They were strong, well-stocked, and heavily manned. But they had a fatal design flaw. They could not see each other. A rugged mountain peak blocked the line of sight between them. If Fort Lockhart was attacked, it couldn't signal Fort Gulistan for help. If Gulistan was overrun, Lockhart would never know until it was too late. The British Army had effectively built two giants and blinded them both. The solution was Saragarhi. It wasn't a fortress. It was a small rectangular blockhouse made of rough stone and mud, perched precariously on the highest point of the ridge. Its purpose was singular: communication. Using a heliograph, a device that used a mirror to flash sunlight in Morse code, the signalers at Saragarhi acted as a relay. Gulistan flashed a message to Saragarhi. Saragarhi caught it, turned the mirror, and flashed it to Lockhart. For the British defense to work, this tiny, exposed box had to stay open. The tribesmen of the Orakzai and Afridi clans knew this. They weren't attacking blindly. They were executing a military strategy. To break the British, they didn't need to conquer the big forts yet. They just needed to smash the mirror. They needed to gouge out the eyes of the enemy. The men inside the post were soldiers of the 36th Sikhs. History often paints them as mythical warriors eager for martyrdom. The truth is more grounding. They were professionals. Most of them were seasoned soldiers. They knew the frontier. They knew the sound of a bullet snapping against rock, and they knew how to conserve water in the heat. Leading them was Havildar Ishar Singh. Ishar Singh was not a polished officer. He was a man with a reputation for being difficult, independent, and stubborn. He was the kind of soldier who sometimes clashed with British authority, but was respected by his own men because he did not panic. He hadn't chosen them, the army had posted them, but he had trained with them long enough to know what they would do. On that morning, he wasn't standing on a podium giving a speech about glory. The routine would have been ammunition counts, water rations, watch rotations, the mechanics of holding an exposed position. He was looking through his binoculars at the dust rising in the valley below. He knew what was coming. The dust wasn't just a raiding party. It was an army. 9 o'clock hours. The first contact. The battle began with a signal. From the watchtower, Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, the detachment's signaler, flashed a message to Fort Lockhart. "Enemy approaching the main gate." From the safety of Fort Lockhart, Lieutenant Colonel Houghton watched through his telescope. He saw the brown waves of tribesmen moving up the slopes like rising water. He replied with a message that sealed their fate. Unable to break through, you are on your own. The transaction was complete. The 21 men at Saragarhi now had the full picture. There would be no relief column. There would be no cavalry charge to save them at the last minute. Ishar Singh gathered his men. He did not order a retreat. He ordered them to their firing positions. 10:30 hours. The first assault was not a chaotic rush. It was a test of discipline. Waves of Pashtun tribesmen surged toward the walls. They were confident. Against a mud wall and 20 rifles, this should have been over in minutes. But the 36th Sikhs had been trained for exactly this moment. They didn't fire all at once. They waited. They let the enemy close the distance, climbing the steep, exposed rocks until they were within 300 yards. Then Ishar Singh gave the order. Volley fire! 20 rifles cracked in unison. The front line of the attack crumpled. The Sikhs worked the bolts of their Martini Henry rifles with rhythmic precision. Load, aim, fire, eject. The heavy 450 caliber rounds punched through shields and thick wool. The tribesmen fell back, stunned by the wall of lead. They regrouped and tried again and again. For the first 2 hours, Saragarhi was an impregnable machine. Every time the attackers tried to rush the open ground, they were cut down. The heliograph kept clicking, sending updates to Lockhart. Enemy repulsed, ammunition holding. But the enemy was smart. They realized they couldn't take the post by force, so they switched tactics. They decided to use the ground itself. 12 p.m. The tribesmen stopped charging the front. Instead, they used the broken terrain to creep around the sides of the post. They found a dead angle, a blind spot at the base of the western wall, where the Sikh rifles couldn't angle down far enough to hit them. Safe in this pocket, hidden from the defenders' sights, the attackers began to work. They didn't have explosives. They had patience. They began to dig. Using knives and bayonets, they picked away at the stones of the wall's foundation. Inside, the Sikhs could hear the scraping. They could hear the wall being hollowed out beneath their feet. Ishar Singh sensed the shift in the battle. The direct assaults were a distraction. The real threat was underneath them. He tried to move men to cover the angle, but the tribal marksmen on the surrounding ridges pinned them down. Bullets rained into the courtyard. The defenders were trapped in a shrinking box. 2 p.m. The heat was blistering. The water was gone. The ammunition was running low. And then, the wall gave way. With a crash of dust and stone, a section of the perimeter collapsed. The tribesmen surged into the breach. The battle instantly changed from a long-range firefight to a brutal, claustrophobic brawl. The Sikhs fixed bayonets. There was no room for tactics anymore. It was visceral. Men fought with rifle butts, with knives, with bare hands. Ishar Singh ordered his men to fall back to the inner line of defense. He knew the post was lost. His goal now wasn't to hold the wall. It was to buy minutes. Every minute they held the inner courtyard was a minute the tribesmen weren't marching on Fort Gulistan. Every minute was a victory. 3 p.m. The last man. The defenders fell one by one. Ishar Singh, wounded and exhausted, ordered his remaining men to retreat into the small blockhouse for a final stand. Accounts suggest he remained outside to cover them, holding the breach alone to buy them time to bolt the heavy wooden door. He fell fighting. Now, only one man remained alive. Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, the signaller. He was locked inside the signaling tower, the highest point of the post. Below him, the post was swarming with attackers. They were setting fire to the door of the tower. The smoke was rising around him. But Gurmukh Singh didn't pick up his rifle yet. He had one final duty to perform. He adjusted the mirror. He aligned it with Fort Lockhart one last time. And he sent a final message. It wasn't a plea for help. It wasn't a farewell to his family. It was a formal request for permission to leave his post.
Main gate breached. Request permission to detach signaling equipment.
From Fort Lockhart, the reply came. Permission granted. Gurmukh Singh carefully packed the heliograph mirrors into their leather case. He didn't smash them. He didn't abandon them. The equipment was later found intact, suggesting that even in his final moments, discipline held. Then he picked up his rifle. He went down into the smoke to meet the end. At 3:30 p.m., the ridge went quiet. The heliograph stopped flashing. The sound of rifle fire faded into the wind. To the watchers at Fort Lockhart, the silence was deafening. The signal was gone. The post was burning. Saragarhi had fallen. But look at what they had achieved. For nearly 7 hours, 21 men had held back thousands. They had forced the enemy to focus their entire strength on a tiny, meaningless patch of ground. By the time the tribesmen finished burning the post, the sun was setting. They were exhausted. They were low on ammunition. They had suffered heavy casualties. When they finally turned to attack Fort Gulistan, the element of surprise was gone. The British reinforcements were ready. The artillery was in position. The tribesmen had won the rock, but they had lost the battle. The delay at Saragarhi had broken the momentum of the attack on the Samana Ridge. 2 days later, the British relief column retook the ridge. They found the ruins of the post. They found the bodies of the 21 Sikhs, surrounded by enemy dead. Tribal sources later admitted to 180 casualties at Saragarhi. British estimates ran higher, could be more than 700, though these likely included losses from the artillery bombardment used to retake the post 2 days later. When the news reached London, the story electrified the empire. It was discussed in Parliament and published in newspapers across the globe. But the most significant recognition came in the form of a medal. Every single one of the 21 soldiers, from the commander Havildar Ishar Singh to the camp follower who supplied the water, was posthumously awarded the Indian Order of Merit. At the time, this was the highest gallantry award an Indian soldier could receive. It was the equivalent of the Victoria Cross. Never before, and never since, has an entire unit been awarded the highest military honor for a single action. The exact details, how many attacked, how many fell, even some of the final actions, remain debated among historians. What isn't debated is this: 21 men held a communication post for 7 hours against overwhelming force. And by doing so, they changed the outcome of the day. They are not remembered today because they were super soldiers. They are remembered because they were ordinary men who were given an impossible order. Hold the line. And they held it until the very last flash of light. If you value stories told with care, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.